Gloria started investing at 53, not 30, not even 40, 53 years old, with almost nothing saved. Everyone told her she'd missed the boat. The compound interest window had closed. The math didn't work anymore. She'd spend her final years scraping by while people who started earlier lived comfortably. That was 12 years ago. Today, Gloria is 65 with a portfolio that's grown over 850% from her initial contributions. She's not a millionaire. She doesn't need to be. She has enough. Enough to stop working when she wants. Enough to help her grandkids. Enough to sleep without the money panic that used to wake her at 3 in the morning. And when people ask her secret, she doesn't talk about stock picks or timing the market or some complicated strategy. She says one thing: I just started. Late, but I started. The biggest lie in personal finance is that there's a deadline. That if you didn't begin in your 20s, you're already finished. That compound interest only works for people with 40 years ahead of them. This belief keeps millions of people paralyzed, watching from the sidelines, convinced that since they can't have everything, they might as well have nothing. I'm going to show you why that belief is mathematically wrong, psychologically destructive, and exactly what keeps people broke. Because here's what nobody tells you when they lecture about the magic of compound interest. Time isn't the only variable. It's the most powerful variable when you start early. But when you start late, you have other advantages. Higher income usually. Lower expenses, possibly, if your kids are grown or your lifestyle has stabilized. More clarity about what you actually want from life. And catch-up contributions that the tax code specifically designed for people in exactly your situation. Let me show you the real math, not the shame math, the possibility math. 74% of Americans have a financial regret, according to a 2025 survey by Bankrate. The number one regret across nearly every generation? Not saving for retirement early enough. For baby boomers, 36% say it's their biggest regret. For Gen X, it's 28%. Millions of people walking around with this weight, this belief that they've already lost. But here's what's strange. When researchers ask people why they haven't made progress on their financial regrets, the number one answer isn't lack of income. It's not even lack of knowledge. It's inflation and high prices, meaning the money is going somewhere else, meaning there might actually be money available, but it's being absorbed by things that feel urgent instead of things that feel important. And that's the trap. The voice that says it's too late becomes the justification for spending everything now. If I can't have a comfortable retirement anyway, why deprive myself today? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy disguised as rational thinking. Let me be clear about something before we go any further. This is not financial advice. I don't know your situation. I don't know your debts, your income, your health, your obligations. What I'm about to share is factual information about what's mathematically possible for people who start investing later in life. You'll need to decide what applies to you. Now let's talk about time, because time is the variable everyone fixates on, and they're not entirely wrong. If you invest $500 a month starting at age 25, assuming a 7% annual return, you'd have roughly $1.5 million by age 65. That's 40 years of compounding. If you start the same $500 a month at age 40, you'd have around $380,000. If you start at 50, roughly $160,000. The numbers are brutal. Nobody's pretending otherwise. Starting early is mathematically superior. Full stop. But here's what those comparisons leave out. First, who in their 20s is actually investing $500 a month? The median net worth for Americans in their 20s is under $40,000, according to recent Empower data. Most people in their 20s are paying rent, paying off student loans, building careers, trying to survive. The hypothetical 25-year-old investor in all these examples often doesn't exist in the real world. The person who actually has $500 a month to invest is frequently someone in their 40s or 50s who finally has their financial life somewhat stabilized. Second, the return assumptions matter enormously. 7% is a conservative estimate based on historical S&P 500 returns adjusted for inflation. The actual nominal average over the past 100 years is around 10%. Over the past 10 years specifically, the S&P averaged nearly 15% annually. If you started investing at age 55 in 2015 and captured that decade, your results would look very different from someone who invested during the flat decade of the 2000s. Timing matters. Market conditions matter. The pessimistic projections assume average conditions. Reality is messier. Third, life expectancy has shifted dramatically. When Social Security was created in the 1930s, life expectancy at birth was around 62 years. Today, it's 79. If you're 53 and relatively healthy, actuarial tables suggest you have roughly another 30 years. That's not a short runway. That's 3 full decades. The CDC reports that life expectancy at age 65 is nearly 20 more years. People who reach retirement age typically live into their mid-80s. Some will live into their 90s. Thinking of yourself as running out of time at 50 or 55 reflects a mental model that's decades out of date. The real question isn't whether you can become a millionaire, it's whether you can build a cushion that meaningfully improves your quality of life for those remaining decades. Let me give you some numbers that might actually help. The tax code provides something called catch-up contributions for people over 50. In 2026, if you're 50 or older, you can contribute up to $32,500 per year to a 401k. That's the regular $24,500 limit plus an $8,000 catch-up. If you're between 60 and 63, there's a super catch-up provision that allows $11,250 in additional contributions, bringing your total possible contribution to $35,750 per year. Think about what that means. Someone who starts at 55 with zero savings, maxing out a 401k at $32,500 per year, invested in a diversified portfolio returning 8% annually, would have roughly $570,000 by age 67. Add in any employer match and it's higher. Add in Social Security and it's a meaningful retirement income. Is that the same as someone who started at 25? Of course not. But is it life-changing compared to having nothing? Absolutely. And there's more. You can also contribute to an IRA. In 2026, the limit is $7,500 or $8,600 with the catch-up contribution for those over 50. That's in addition to your 401k. If you're married and your spouse also works, both of you can max out these accounts, effectively doubling your household contribution potential. I'm not going to pretend this is easy. Saving $30,000+ a year requires serious income and serious discipline. But most people I see lamenting that it's too late aren't talking about whether they can save $30,000. They're wondering whether it's even worth saving anything. And the answer to that question is unambiguously yes. Here's a scenario that's more realistic for many late starters. Let's say you're 50 years old with nothing saved. You can't max out a 401k, but you can contribute enough to get your full employer match, maybe 6% of your salary, and you can put another $200 a month into a Roth IRA. If your salary is $70,000 and your employer matches up to 3%, you're saving about $4,200 in your 401k, plus your employer's $2,100 match, plus $2,400 in your IRA. That's roughly $8,700 per year invested. With an 8% average return, in 15 years you'd have approximately $250,000. Add Social Security and any other income sources, and you're in a meaningfully better position than if you'd saved nothing. But here's what I think matters even more than the math. Starting to invest at any age changes your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who can't handle money and start seeing yourself as someone who builds wealth. That shift is worth more than the compound interest, honestly, because the psychological change ripples outward into every other financial decision. People who see themselves as investors start making different choices. They negotiate for raises because they know where the money will go. They side hustle, not for spending money, but for investment capital. They cut expenses, not from deprivation, but from strategy. The identity shift creates momentum. 54% of American households have no dedicated retirement savings. The median retirement balance for people 55 to 64 is only $185,000. The gap between what people think they need, which surveys suggest is around $1.26 million, and what they actually have is enormous. But that gap also reveals something important. You're not as far behind as you think. The competition isn't against fictional, perfect savers. It's against the actual reality of what most people have. And most people have almost nothing. Here's something that rarely gets discussed. Older investors actually have hidden advantages that younger investors don't. Experience teaches patience. A 55-year-old has lived through market crashes, recessions, bubbles, and recoveries. They've seen the world not end multiple times. This perspective is worth more than people realize because the biggest destroyer of investment returns isn't fees or bad stock picks. It's panic selling. When the market dropped 30% in March of 2020, inexperienced investors sold at the bottom. Experienced investors, the ones who had seen this before, held steady or bought more. Those who held saw the market fully recover within months. Behavioral finance research consistently shows that the average investor dramatically underperforms the market, not because they pick bad investments, but because they buy high when they're excited and sell low when they're scared. Older investors who have weathered multiple storms are less likely to make these emotional mistakes. There's also something to be said for knowing yourself better. At 25, you might think you can stomach a 50% portfolio drop. At 55, you actually know whether you can because you've probably experienced one. That self-knowledge allows for better risk calibration. You're less likely to take on more volatility than you can handle and then bail at the worst possible moment. But I need to warn you about something. When people realize they're behind on retirement savings, a dangerous temptation emerges. The urge to catch up fast, to make up for lost time through high-risk bets, cryptocurrency speculation, options trading, penny stocks, some hot tip from a coworker. This is exactly the wrong approach. The math might feel like it supports taking big risks. If I need to grow my money faster, shouldn't I invest in things that can double quickly? The problem is that things that can double quickly can also go to zero quickly. And when you're 55 with limited savings, a 50% loss isn't just a setback, it's potentially catastrophic. You don't have decades to recover. Gloria didn't build her 850% return through gambling. She invested consistently in diversified index funds. Nothing fancy, nothing exciting. The boring approach that actually works. The market did the heavy lifting, but only because she stayed in the market instead of trying to outsmart it. Late starters need more growth than someone who started early, yes, but they need reliable growth, not lottery tickets. The gap between aggressive and reckless is where retirements go to die. Let me address the emotional weight of this, because numbers only get you so far. The feeling of being too late is often mixed up with shame. You made decisions you regret. You spent when you should have saved. You prioritized the wrong things. Maybe you helped family members or dealt with medical expenses or just didn't know any better. Whatever the story is, you're carrying it. But here's what I want you to understand. That shame is a sunk cost. It cannot be recovered through continued punishment. The only way out is forward. There's a concept in psychology called the fresh start effect. Researchers found that people are more likely to pursue goals when they feel they're beginning a new chapter, a new year, a new job, a birthday that ends in zero. These arbitrary markers create psychological permission to change. You don't need a calendar to give you that permission. You can decide that today is your fresh start, right now. This conversation you're having with yourself while watching this video. Because the alternative is what? Waiting another 5 years until it feels even more hopeless? The regret you're feeling now will only intensify with time if you don't act. The compound interest you missed in your 20s is gone, yes, but the compound interest available between now and your death is still on the table. Don't miss that too. Let's talk about what actually matters in late start investing, because the strategy differs from someone who has 40 years ahead of them. For late starters, asset allocation needs to be more aggressive than conventional wisdom might suggest. The typical advice says to own bonds equal to your age as a percentage of your portfolio. By that logic, a 60-year-old would have 60% bonds. But someone who starts late with a small portfolio may need more growth exposure to have any chance of building meaningful wealth. A higher equity allocation, perhaps 80% stocks even into your 50s and early 60s, can make sense if you have other income sources, a stable job, and a long enough runway. This is a personal decision that requires honest assessment of your risk tolerance and needs. But don't automatically assume you should be conservative just because you're older. Social Security optimization becomes more important when you have less saved. Delaying benefits from 62 to 70 increases your monthly check by roughly 77%. For someone with limited savings, that extra income over a potentially long retirement can outweigh the value of early benefits. If you can work until 70 or even 67 and let your benefits grow, you're effectively buying yourself a larger annuity funded by the government. Healthcare planning is essential because it's one of the biggest retirement expenses. Understanding Medicare options, supplemental coverage, and potential long-term care costs helps you build a realistic picture of what you'll need. Many people underestimate healthcare expenses by tens of thousands of dollars. Part-time work in early retirement extends your runway and reduces sequence of returns risk. If the market drops 30% the year you retire, having even modest income from consulting, freelancing, or part-time work reduces how much you need to withdraw from your portfolio during the recovery period. Late starters often have valuable professional experience that translates well to consulting or advisory roles. And downsizing, while emotionally difficult, can instantly add hundreds of thousands of dollars to your net worth. If you own a home with significant equity, selling and moving to a lower-cost area can be more valuable than years of savings. This isn't possible or desirable for everyone, but it's an option that should be on the table. Now I want to talk about the stories we tell ourselves, because ultimately, what keeps people paralyzed isn't lack of information, it's lack of permission. You've internalized a narrative that says you failed, that it's too late, that the train has left the station. This narrative feels true because you can point to evidence. You can show me the calculations that prove someone who started at 25 is better off. You can cite statistics about what you need to retire comfortably. The evidence supports the story of hopelessness, but evidence can be found for any story. I can also show you evidence that most Americans have almost nothing saved, and that even modest late-stage investing puts you ahead of the majority. I can show you evidence that life expectancy keeps rising and that people routinely live productive lives well into their 80s. I can show you people who started at 55 and retired comfortably at 70 with enough money to enjoy their remaining years. Which evidence you focus on is a choice, and that choice shapes your behavior. If you tell yourself it's too late, you'll act accordingly. You'll spend freely. You'll avoid looking at your finances. You'll continue the pattern that got you here. If you tell yourself you have time, you'll act differently. You'll sacrifice short-term pleasures for long-term security. You'll learn what you don't know. You'll start. The biggest investing mistake isn't what you think it is. It's not buying the wrong stock. It's not missing out on some hot investment. It's not even starting late. The biggest investing mistake is using the fact that you started late as a reason to never start at all. Let me tell you about the mathematics of delay within delay. Every year you wait after deciding it's too late makes the problem worse. Someone who could have started at 50 but waited until 55 has lost 5 more years of compounding. Someone who could have started at 45 but waited until 50 has lost 5 years they can never recover. The same logic that says it was too late at 50 says it's even more too late now, which means the logic will always say that. It's a trap that closes tighter with every passing year. The only way out is to reject the premise entirely. It's not too late because late is a comparison to something that doesn't exist. The version of you that started at 25 is fictional. The only real version is the one sitting here right now, with whatever time remains, deciding what to do next. Here's what I want you to do after this video. First, actually calculate what's possible. Use a simple compound interest calculator. Plug in realistic numbers. Not the maximum you could theoretically save, but what you could actually, practically commit to. See what 15 or 20 years of consistent investing at that level produces. You might be surprised. Second, set up automatic contributions tomorrow. Not next month, tomorrow. Even if it's $50 from each paycheck. The amount matters less than the habit. You can increase it later, but starting creates identity change that makes increasing easier. Third, you learn what tax-advantaged options are available to you. If your employer offers a 401k match and you're not taking the full match, you're leaving free money on the table. If you qualify for catch-up contributions, use them. If a Roth IRA makes sense for your tax situation, open one. Fourth, calculate your Social Security benefits at different claiming ages. The SSA website has estimators. See the difference between claiming at 62 versus 67 versus 70. For late starters, that larger Social Security check often matters more than for someone with a massive portfolio. Fifth, and this is the one people skip, tell someone. Tell a friend, a family member, a partner. I'm starting to invest for retirement. Making it social creates accountability. It makes the decision real instead of aspirational. Gloria, the woman I mentioned at the beginning, she did all of this. She wasn't special. She didn't have insider knowledge or a windfall inheritance. She had a decent job, discipline she didn't know she had, and a decision to stop believing the lie that her time had passed. 12 years later, her portfolio shows 850% growth on her contributions. The market helped, yes, but she had to be in the market to receive that help. The people who actually miss out on wealth aren't the ones who start late. They're the ones who never start at all. The year you were born isn't a sentence. The age on your driver's license isn't destiny. The only thing that determines whether you build wealth from here is whether you decide to try. I know the compound interest charts make late starters feel hopeless. I know the financial media celebrates 30-year-olds who retired early while ignoring the 50-year-olds who are just getting started. I know the comparison culture makes everyone feel behind. But comparison is theft. It steals your motivation, your peace, your sense of possibility. The only comparison that matters is between who you are now and who you could be in 15 years if you start today. Because here's the brutal truth nobody likes to say out loud. You're going to be 65 eventually no matter what, or 70, or 75. You're going to reach those ages whether you save or you don't. The only question is whether future you has something or nothing. And nothing is what happens by default if you decide it's too late. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. You might not become a millionaire. You might not retire early to a beach house, but you can become someone who has options instead of desperation. Someone who has a cushion instead of panic. Someone who controls their final decades instead of surviving them. That's not a small thing. That's everything. Start now.